Hello and welcome. I'm Gemma, and this is the English with Gemma podcast. How are you guys doing? I hope you're doing well. I can't believe that, we're already in April. I feel like time is flying for me at least. I actually have my birthday this month. I'll be turning 27 on April 18th, so I'm really looking forward to that. Normally, I'm not home during this time. I was living in Spain for the past 5 years, so yeah, it's been a while since I've been home for my birthday and I've spent that with my family, so I'm really looking forward to that. It should be fun. I hope you guys are all doing well, and wherever you are in the world, I hope it's warming up a little bit, maybe getting into the spring season, depending on, what hemisphere you're currently in. But yes, I hope that the worst of this cold weather is behind us. The weather in Bermuda is kind of weird right now. It kind of goes from being cold and rainy and then super beautiful and sunny like 2 days ago. Was it 2 days ago? Yeah, like 2 days ago during Easter. Um, Sorry, I got something in my eye. Of course, as soon as I turn on the camera and my microphone and want to record a podcast, I'm blind in my left eye. What is in there? Sorry. If you're squeamish with people touching their eyes and you're on YouTube right now watching the video, you better look away because I am digging in my left eye right now. Woo! Okay, I think I got it. Did I get it? Yeah. Sorry about that. What was I talking about? Oh, the weather. Yeah, super interesting topic, Gemma. But yeah, I was just basically saying that on Easter Sunday, we had beautiful weather and like gorgeous, sunny, clear skies. And then today it's like cloudy and rainy and honestly kind of cold. Well, cold for Bermuda, which is like 20 degrees Celsius. So I guess I'm being a bit spoiled. But, when you're used to the warm weather, it's kind of not fun when it cools down out of nowhere. Anyways, let me stop rambling and let us get into today's topic. So, I'm really excited about this one. I think you are going to be excited as well. And today's episode is surprisingly not a random topic where I just, choose something and talk about it. Today is focused on English and tips and tricks for how to get unstuck from B1 level and start making progress into B2 level. Because I know so many of us, we, the jump from A2 to B1 is really big, right? And then once you're in the B1 level, your intermediate level, it can often start to feel like progress is slowing down and you reach this, what we call in English, plateau. A plateau, it's like a flat line. So instead of a line that's going up and increasing, if you imagine like a graph, you now have a straight line, a flat line. You're not going down with your progress, but you're also not going up. You're just kind of staying the same. You're kind of stuck in this in between limbo phase. And if that's happening to you right now, don't feel bad. It happens to a lot of us. It's a weird place to be, that B1 level. Um, and I kind of just want to give you my advice as an English teacher with over 5 years of experience now on how we can start to bridge that gap between B1 and B2. So, before we start going over my tips and tricks, I want to talk about I'm so sorry. Now my right eye has something in it. You know what I think it is? I'm using this new eyeshadow and I genuinely think I'm like allergic to it because every time I put it on, my eyes start itching. So I'm just making a mental note that maybe next time I shouldn't wear this eyeshadow. Even though if you're watching the video right now on YouTube, look how cute and sparkly and shiny my eyes are. They're about to be bright red after I finish itching them. Okay, I have to stop touching them. Ooh, they're so itchy though. Okay. Woo! Let's get back into it. Guys, I really pride myself on professionalism and just being perfect, having a super seamless podcast with no bloopers and weird things in the middle. Obviously, that's sarcasm because I'm kind of a mess. Anyways, that's life. Let's get it back into it. So I might be itching my eyes the whole time and I just want to apologize in advance. Hopefully my tips and tricks will make up for you watching me itch my eyes. So before we start going over my tips on how to get from B1 to B2, let's quickly talk about what you should be able to do at a B1 level and what you should be able to do at a B2 level. So at a B1 intermediate level, English learners should be able to describe their experiences and desires with a good level of fluency, okay? You should be able to listen to and understand TV shows and things like that, but you still feel more comfortable using subtitles. Now, this is kind of a little bit of a controversial topic, at least for me, because I'm a firm believer in using subtitles. Even as a native English speaker, I will often, honestly, more often than not, I watch TV shows and movies with subtitles on because, there's so much going on. There's background noise, especially if you're watching like an action movie. There's super like loud explosions. Sometimes the dialogue between characters is really fast and, um, or quiet and just unclear in general. So, a lot of influencers or English teachers on social media will say like, stop using subtitles. And I don't really agree with that. Like, honestly, I think if they help you, they help you. And there's no shame in using them. I am a native, English speaker and an English teacher, and I use subtitles all the time, especially if it's a different accent or, depends. Like Peaky Blinders, that show, I love that. That's my favorite show. But the accents from Birmingham and they talk like this. And I don't really know if that's a Birmingham accent, but that you get that was terrible. You get the gist, hopefully. It's hard to understand, so I use subtitles and it's totally fine. So yeah, as long as you're not using, let's say you're a Spanish native speaker, you know, don't be using Spanish subtitles. I would definitely say have the audio in English and the subtitles in English, but there's no problem with using subtitles, in my opinion, even if you're at a C1 level, advanced for anyone who doesn't know. So yeah, you should be able to follow the plot in simple English stories and understand what's going on in the news if you're watching the news. And you should also be able to write simple texts on topics that are familiar to you or of personal interest and you feel comfortable talking about. So that's kind of B1 level. Obviously, that's a very vague description, not super detailed, but that's okay. We're just, outlining in general what you should be able to do at a B1 level. So of course that takes us to what should you be able to do at a B2, which is upper intermediate level. So you should be able to take an active part in discussions on familiar contexts, but also unfamiliar as well. And you should be able to provide relevant explanations and arguments for your opinions. You should be able to understand standard speech spoken at a normal speed. So what I mean is a native, natural speed of speaking English. A lot of people tell me that I speak too quickly on my Instagram videos. But I always tell people, if you want to learn English, real life English, and you want to be able to understand native speakers, I hate to break it to you, but that's how native speakers talk. So I don't really moderate my speed of speech. Of course, I am a little bit on this podcast slowing down for you because if you're not watching the video on YouTube, when you're just listening to audio, it can sometimes be a little bit difficult because you're just, relying on audio cues and you can't see my mouth moving. So I am slowing down a little bit for you guys, but not too much because I really believe that you should be able to, at least at a B2 level, understand a normal rate of speech. So yeah, you should be able to understand standard speech spoken at a normal speed, provided that the topic is reasonably familiar for you. Reasonably, means quite familiar, not totally. And you should be able to understand the main ideas when reading a complex text, as well as contemporary prose, which means, stories, books, modern books, articles, and reports, news reports. And finally, this is about your written abilities. You should be able to write clear, detailed texts on subjects related to your interests or area of expertise. So, you know, they are kind of similar, but at a B2 level, you're just taking it that one step further where you are able to be a little more out of your comfort zone and you can start expanding your vocabulary. You start understanding native speakers better. You don't feel so lost when you're listening to a conversation or watching a movie. And at B1 level, you should be able to understand kind of the gist, the general idea of movies and things like that and videos. And then at a B2 level, that's when you should start to get more detail. So not just the general idea, but more of a detailed overview of what you're watching or listening to. So in a second, I'm going to outline the main things that you need to do in order to get from a B1 to a B2 level. But firstly, I really want to highlight the importance of taking risks. So like what I just mentioned, stepping out of your comfort zone because you won't be able to make that jump between those two levels if you don't lose that fear of making mistakes and start doing things that really challenge you and make you uncomfortable because, growth happens in discomfort. Growth does not happen inside of your comfort zone. So you should really try speaking more about unfamiliar topics in English, as well as writing more complex articles or essays for practice. And then you should expand your knowledge of both vocabulary, but also grammar. So some of those more complex tenses or structures like third conditional, mixed conditionals, you should start having a look at those if you really want to take your English from a B1 into a B2 level. Um, and saying all of this, of course, I understand it's easier said than done. I've done this myself with Spanish. I learned Spanish and I never went to an English class, so it took me I never went to a Spanish class. So it took me a really long time to get out of this plateau. I definitely felt like um, a huge upward tick when I was like going from an A2 to a B1 level of Spanish. But then once I kind of reached B1, I felt stuck. So I can definitely relate to you if you're feeling like that with your English. And the only time that I started to notice myself kind of getting more into like B2 And I would say that's kind of where I'm at right now, probably like an upper B2 in Spanish, or like mid, like B2.1 or something. Um, that started to happen when I was forced out of my comfort zone. So, my ex-boyfriend was a Spanish native speaker. And at the beginning, I used to make him come with me to all of my doctor's appointments because I wasn't confident speaking on my own. I would make him, help me with any type of bureaucracy or government like documentation or going to like government appointments. And then I think one day he was busy and he couldn't come with me to the doctors and help me explain, whatever medical issue I had going on at the time. And that is when I really started to make that jump into the B2 level because I was just forced. I had to figure it out. And, I still took some notes with me and I translated a few phrases beforehand, but I struggled and it was a challenge to communicate, but I did it. And then once I started just doing more and more things in Spanish, that were out of my comfort zone, that's when I really started seeing the growth. So that's super, super important. That's the main, if you take anything away from this episode today, that's the main thing I want you to take is stepping out of your comfort zone. Um, yeah, so that's where I'll end on that kind of topic. And now we'll get into more of the specific tips that I want to talk about. But first, I need to take a little sip of water. So now that I'm hydrated, I'm ready to go. If you're watching the YouTube video of this episode, you will see me looking down at my computer screen because I've made some notes and I want to make sure that I've got everything, exactly how I want it, and I'm able to remember all of my points. So the first thing that I want to talk about, is this idea of immersion in the language. So if you want to go from a B1 to a B2, you really need to make sure you're immersing yourself in the language as much as possible in your day-to-day life. Be creative. Figure out different ways that you can do this. Surround yourself with English. You can obviously watch movies, listen to music, read books, watch the news, listen to podcasts like this lovely podcast here. Um, so, there are loads of things that you can do. One thing that I did when I lived in Spain was I always wrote my grocery list, for the grocery store in Spanish. And that really helped me, obviously, with food vocabulary and things like that. And then another thing that again, a little bit of a controversial topic. Some teachers will tell you that this is totally not useful, and then others, like me, will swear by this and say it's a great thing to do. I highly recommend changing your phone into English. The second day I arrived in Spain back in 2018, I changed my phone into Spanish. And for a while, of course, I kind of struggled because I didn't know Spanish back then. But your phone. I mean, most of us know our phones well enough that we can, by memory, figure out where everything is. And then the next step is to not just rely on the icons and things like that in your phone. It's to really start to pay attention to, okay, how do you say what, settings or apps or I don't know, like whatever vocabulary you're seeing on your phone that's different, make a note of that and really pay attention to it. My phone is still in Spanish 5 years later. So I think it's awesome. I think it's a great thing to do. I highly recommend doing that, and it worked for me. I think I've learned so much like technological vocabulary and phone vocab just from having my phone in Spanish. So that's another thing that you can do. And so, of course, this is a pretty simple takeaway from the idea of immersion, but the more that you expose yourself to a language, the faster and, the more natural that language will come to you. So a lot of people might say, oh, it's really difficult for me to learn English because I'm not living in an English speaking country. But realistically, you don't need to live in an English speaking country to immerse yourself in the language. Okay. So I don't want to hear your excuses. Just kidding. So the next thing that I want to talk about, it's super important. It's something that I still cannot understand when students tell me, I want to improve my speaking, but I don't have anyone to speak with, or I don't ever practice speaking. So, like, you can't improve your speaking without actually speaking. It's like saying you want to improve your football skills without ever kicking a football. Like, you have to actually do the thing in order to get better at it, right? So there are, if you can't, afford English classes or whatever reason you might not be able to attend a class, because obviously that's the best way to go from B1 to B2 would of course be having English classes regularly. But if you can't do that for whatever reason, there are so many apps now where you can practice speaking. There are loads of like speaking clubs, and there are loads of ways that you can speak English. So, there are things like Elsa, Pingo Learn. I've worked with those companies before, and I genuinely believe in them and think that they're really good as either an auxiliary kind of thing that you're doing in tandem with English classes, or if you can't have English classes, it's something good to do by itself, um, in order to practice your speaking and get corrections. So yeah, you really need to practice speaking regularly if you want to get to a B2 level, whether it's with a language partner, English teacher, or just like by yourself, like I mentioned before, using apps. Another thing I'll say is like try not to be afraid of making mistakes. When we constantly think like, oh, I'm gonna make a mistake, so I shouldn't even try, or I shouldn't try this more complex sentence, you're hindering yourself. That means you're stopping yourself, you're preventing yourself from making progress, because progress comes from mistakes. When you make a mistake and then you realize that mistake, hopefully, you can then correct it and then you grow from that mistake. So mistakes are never a bad thing. And I know that it's easy to feel stupid or embarrassed when you make mistakes in English. Trust me, I get it. I've made so many embarrassing mistakes while speaking Spanish. But I never made those mistakes again because that that was etched into my memory, and it helped me improve for the next time. So don't, making mistakes is a natural part of the learning process, and it's nothing to be afraid of. Um, just focus on communication rather than perfection. I talk to my students a lot about the difference between fluency and accuracy. You can be fluent but not accurate, which is honestly fine when you're in the process of refining your English skills. You can speak very fluently and make loads of mistakes, but as long as people are understanding you and it's not hindering your communication, it's okay, right? So don't worry about being perfect, just worry about communication. And yeah, that's what I would say about practicing your speaking. So that leads me to my next topic, or my next tip, which is expanding your vocabulary. So, as an English teacher, the main thing that tells me if someone is a B1 or a B2 level is the difference in, obviously, grammar structures, but also vocabulary. So if I'm noticing someone who is obviously very comfortable with the same types of words or phrases or expressions, and they reuse those phrases a lot, I can say, okay, they're probably B1. When there's nothing wrong with that, but of course, we're focusing on how to get to B2 level. So that's when you need to start using new and different and maybe scary big words and phrases and phrasal verbs and more native speaker, colloquial kind of expressions. So the way that you can do this is, making it a habit. Make it a habit to learn new words and phrases every day. And if you don't know how to form habits and keep them, I would recommend listening to my episode 2, which is called Atomic Habits, where I summarize a lot of key points from the book Atomic Habits and how to implement good practices into your life and stick with them. So definitely check that out if you're interested in making English studying a daily habit for yourself. So, getting back to expanding your vocabulary, make it a habit, learn new words and phrases every day, keep a vocab journal or use flashcards. I love sticky notes, post-it notes, whatever they're called. You can stick those on your fridge or on your window or on your mirror or just all around your house with new words and expressions. You can even stick them on things like if you're learning food vocabulary, stick it on your fridge. If you're learning makeup or bathroom vocabulary, stick it in your bathroom, right? And try to learn words in context. So I really don't recommend isolating words and taking them out of context and just trying to memorize them like that, especially phrasal verbs. When you learn phrasal verbs out of context, it's really hard to remember them. So I always say, instead of trying to learn phrasal verbs like phrasal verbs with up or phrasal verbs with in, instead of learning them in those big long lists, and realistically, your brain cannot hold on to more than 10 new words at a time. So instead of learning those big long lists, I always say pick a topic like shopping, restaurants, TV, whatever, and learn phrasal verbs in those topics, right? So, for example, if we're talking about restaurants, you could say take out, order in. Like those are all phrasal verbs and they all have something to do with food. Serve up, dish out. Okay, so instead of learning phrasal verbs like in those weird long lists, which is not helpful at all, learn them in a topic, learn them in context. It will be much easier to remember them that way. And then try to read and listen to authentic materials in order to expand your vocabulary. So at a B2 level, I would really highly recommend, instead of focusing on grammar books and books for learning English or podcasts for learning English, unless it's like this one, which is, very natural and whatever. Yeah, instead of focusing on things that are specifically for learning English, just listen to as much English stuff as you can. Doesn't matter if it's for learning English or not. You actually want it to be authentic and real life English. And then once you learn these new words and phrases, hopefully with the tips that I've shared, don't forget to actually utilize them, right? That's the most important thing. Utilize them in your own speaking and writing as much as possible, because once we learn something, the way that we remember it and the way that we ingrain it into our brain is by actually using it and putting it into practice. All right, so my next tip for you guys is refining your grammar. I'm just going to touch on this really briefly because, of course, if we get into all the different areas of B2 grammar, that would be an entirely different podcast episode. But yeah, we want to look at refining our grammar skills, focus on the areas where you struggle the most, and then practice those regularly. Don't be afraid to go back to B1 level grammar and have a little review of those topics if you feel like some of them aren't, as refined as they could be, or you're missing some basics. I'm missing a lot of basics in Spanish grammar because, like I said, I never studied in a class or with a teacher, so I very often have to go back all the way to the basics of Spanish and, review the tenses. So don't be afraid to do that. Find online resources or grammar books, or take a structured grammar course that is specifically for B2 level if you have the ability to do that. And then don't rush through it. I know grammar is boring and well, I think grammar is boring, and I'm an English teacher. Some people love grammar. I personally don't, and I don't love teaching it. So I try to find ways to make it fun. But don't rush through the grammar. If you find the process boring, take breaks and come back to the grammar when you feel like it, because mastering grammar takes time and patience and practice, right? And practice makes progress. Practice does not make perfect. So you're probably still going to make mistakes, and that's totally fine. All right, I've got three more topics for you guys. And don't worry, I'm almost done. If you're still here and you're sticking with me, well done to you. You are one step closer to getting that B2 level, hopefully. So my next tip is active listening. Engage in active listening. If you don't know what active listening is, that would be when you listen to something like a podcast, TV show, news, music, and instead of just passively listening, which is just, you know, sitting there, hanging out, listening, and doing nothing else, you kind of make an exercise out of the listening. So you pay special attention to intonation patterns, or you pay special attention to pronunciation and word stress. And then you can also do shadowing, which is trying to mimic, repeat what you hear, and then practice speaking along with the audio or video. And, go back, rewind, pause, and take your time with it and turn it from a passive listening to an active listening exercise. That's really going to help to improve your listening skills, obviously, like listening comprehension, but then also your speaking skills simultaneously at the same time, because you will then be producing speech, and that's an active part of listening, right? Not just hearing speech and passively listening. And another thing to keep in mind is setting realistic goals with yourself. So it might seem like a huge feat, a huge challenge to go from B1 to B2. And it is difficult, but it's not impossible. Many, many people do it. It just takes time and patience and dedication and being realistic with yourself. So this is something that I talk about in episode 2 when I talk about atomic habits. I talk a lot about being realistic with your goals when setting up a new habit, and also tracking your progress, because that will motivate you. So try to break down this large overall goal of reaching B2 level into smaller achievable milestones. So like a milestone, is like a marker of progress. So for example, that could be like, okay, I want to be able to understand this movie without subtitles, and then just focus on that one thing. Or I want to be able to understand the second conditional better and just focus on that one thing. I want to learn new and challenging phrasal verbs, more complex phrasal verbs about restaurants and eating out. Focus on that. So instead of focusing on many different topics at the same time, try to break it down into smaller chunks. This will make it more achievable, and it will also, motivate you more, because you're more likely to be successful when you're working in this way. And then don't forget to celebrate your success along the way. So really celebrate your little wins, even if they're small, they're big for you. And when I did silly things in Spanish, well, not silly at all, actually, I would go to the doctors and be able to express myself. I would always celebrate. I would like go take myself to the movies, or go get a snack or something, or do something I really liked to kind of celebrate, like, oh my God, I got through that doctor's appointment in Spanish, right? So celebrate your success, even if it seems small. And remember, like, every step forward and every goal that you achieve is one step closer to reaching that B2 level, which is your ultimate goal. So try not to get overwhelmed, stressed out with feeling like it's a huge thing that you have to do, which is reach B2. Just break it down and celebrate your progress. It takes time. That's another thing. Like so many people get frustrated or impatient and they think they should be at a certain level already, but the truth is it takes a lot of time and dedication and hard work, and nobody's going to do it for you. You have to do it for yourself. So even if you have an English teacher, even if you're signed up to a grammar course, you have to do work outside of those classes in order to really see the progress that you probably want to see. So don't forget to work hard, believe in yourself, and you will get there. I promise you will. And don't be afraid. My final tip is don't be afraid to seek guidance and help, right? So from somebody qualified like me or anyone, any English as a second language tutor, whether they're native or non-native, it does not matter. I know so many good non-native English teachers because they have had to learn English as a second language themselves. So, they have the tips and the tricks that maybe I don't have. Um, of course, I have good tips and tricks too. I'm just saying, don't eliminate the idea of using a non-native teacher. And remember that the best and fastest way is obviously to have someone like me who can help you and guide you, create a course for you, provide personalized feedback and corrections, tailor the classes to your specific needs and areas of weakness, give you homework. So, of course, that's in an ideal world, but I totally understand that not everybody has the resources to have English classes, but, investing in your language education and prioritizing that is going to make a significant difference in you know, your overall progress and speed of progress, quality of progress. So I will just leave you with that. And that's it, moving from an intermediate level to upper intermediate is within your reach. It might not feel like it all the time, but it is. It takes dedication, perseverance, and, having the right strategies. And I really hope that some of these strategies that I shared can be helpful for you. I know maybe not all of them are groundbreaking or new. You've probably heard some similar advice before, but the reason why the advice is kind of the same is because it's true. Like that's the stuff that helps and works when you want to get to a B2 level. So just remember, you are more capable than you probably think. Believe in yourself, stay motivated. If you have trouble staying motivated or sticking to habits, I really urge you to check out episode 2, where I talk about habits, and keep pushing forward. You got this. I believe in you. I know you can do this. So until the next episode, happy learning, and I'll see you guys later. Good luck. Bye.